Hello, everyone. You can see the numbers going up. The young and black. So we're going to start the conversation now. Is everyone ready? I have my amazing panel today. We are doing a conversation around the misplacement of Black people in the education system. So this event brings together a range of Black experts to discuss the lack of Black history taught in UK schools. Our panel will share their experiences, highlight what changes can and need to be made, while highlighting resources and organisations who are already doing the work to ensure that Black history is better represented in schools in the UK. So we have an amazing panel. We have a great host, Sabrina, that I will be passing on to. So please follow the conversation on Twitter as well. We'll be live tweeting. So any thoughts that you guys have while listening to this webinar, please tweet using the hashtag Young and Black and @UKU. And I will pass it on to Sabrina.
Hi everyone, thanks Ty. So I'm going to start by introducing myself. So I'm Sabrina Jones. I'm the founder and CEO of a social enterprise called State of Chess. So State of Chess' aim is to help reduce school exclusions, and this is because of the negative impact that exclusions can have on young people. For example, someone that is excluded is 4 times more likely to be jailed as an adult, and someone that is excluded is also more likely to get involved in youth violence. I now want to introduce the rest of the panelists. So Jarrell, can we go to you next?
Hi people, my name is Jarrell Jackson. I'm the Chief Creative Changemaker at Creative Academies Network, which is an organisation that supports children and young people to reach their full potential. So we use arts, social action, digital, enterprise, you name it, to really enrich the lives of young people in the Midlands area with a key focus on the Black country, which is the kind of west side to the Birmingham area. But also I do have a lot of other strategic roles. So I sit on the board for the West Midlands Combined Authorities Cultural Leadership Board. I'm also one of the young trustees for the Windsor Academy Trust, which is a 9-school academy trust with a £40 million income generation. But also I sit on other regional boards which supports children and young people to reach their potential through the arts and sports and other things like that as well, Sabrina.
Great, thank you. Florence, can we go to you next, please?
Hi, so I'm Florence. I'm a recent graduate from the University of Liverpool, International Politics and Policy and History. I'm currently doing youth project work at Blam UK. So I do create the digital resources, the free resources about Black history, linking to Black history, working with schools, working with different youth groups. With this, I have like a special interest in making histories accessible, because if you're not making them accessible, then what's the point in like it being stuck in academia, and with certain people, there's no point in history just remaining there. I've also worked at different educational charities. I've worked at places like DebateMate and the English Speaking Union. I have lots of public speaking experience. And I'm also part of the Young Historians Project, where we research histories that are usually untold. And our current project is about African women and their relationship with the British Health Service since the 1930s. So that's something we're currently researching. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Florence. Khalid?
Hi guys, my name's Khalid Rouse. I'm in my 9th year of being a secondary school maths teacher. Currently, I'm a head of year and I'm also in charge of safeguarding. I studied law at Cambridge University, where I was also the president of the ACS. I got into teaching through Teach First. So my whole motivation for abandoning the law career and coming to teaching instead is to try and educate and improve the outcomes of all young people, but especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds.
Thanks, Khalid. Last but not least, Asaro?
Hi everyone, my name is Asaro. I started my career in education through being elected the first female Black president of Hull University. So through my work being a SU president, I did a lot of campaigns. A lot of them was to do with helping Black people. Unfortunately, I did experience a lot of racism in my role, and that led me to create a campaign called Make Diversity Count, which seeks to change the Equality Act 10 years on, to make sure that it's more robust, so that all organisations in the UK have a anti-discrimination policy, and with a focus on having a more robust reporting mechanism. I currently work as a consultant. I work for different firms, for universities in higher education, and my specialties is in diversity and inclusion, and a current project that I'm doing is looking at universities' responses to Black Lives Matter to provide best practice and recommendations moving forward.
So the first topic which I want to discuss is, can you all just give a brief summary as to what you think your education experience of Black history was like in school? So for me personally, apart from studying slavery, I don't remember covering anything to do with Black people in history. And I think that's a concern, because history for Black people didn't start at slavery, it was interrupted by slavery. There was lots of great things which Black people have achieved, but for me, in history, all we covered was slavery, and we watched the film Roots, which I'm sure most people know, and if you don't know, it's basically telling the story of slavery from a person's point of view. And I think for me, this is disappointing, because if you don't see people who look like you achieving great things, that's going to really impact your aspirations and what you believe that you can achieve. And as the founder of State of Chess, when we work with students, especially Black students, because Black Caribbean students in particular are disproportionately excluded, the number one thing they say is that if they don't see themselves represented in books, or if they don't see themselves represented in the school, then why should the aspirations be high? Why should they want to aim for anything? So I think personally for me, it's really important that in Black history, there are more positive stories, and also we see ourselves represented in the education system. Khalil, what do you think about this?
Yeah, so very similar to you. So my experiences of Black history, we did the slave trade, but we had a big focus on the US civil rights movement as well. Those are the two, what I'd consider to be Black-centric topics that we learned in school. And I think taking stock of everything and think about how I think about my own schooling, I genuinely, when I was younger, didn't really think there were any Black people in the UK until the Windrush generation. Genuinely, I hadn't seen it, hadn't had any exposure to any historical books or images or topics that showed that there were Black people in Britain. Then the first time, then my own kind of, when I thought of my own family and everyone, and my grandparents, us being second generation essentially in this country, my assumption was, all right, so most, and my friends very similar, my assumption was, yeah, fair enough, most of the Black people in the UK are second generation, and we weren't really present in this country beforehand. And it's not until I got to way beyond schooling years that I was even made aware of the abundance of contribution Black people made to British history, and how it's just been overlooked in my own schooling experience and really shaped my own perspective. But I've had to go away as I've got older and actually do a little bit of looking. I've still got a lot more to learn. But my schooling experience was very, very narrow. And it was a shame, a massive shame, because it shaped my own perspective about Black people in Britain, and it was a wrong one and it's misguided.
Does anyone else have any input to add to that?
Yeah.
So my experience my experience at school, generally there was nothing taught about Black history at all. And thinking about when the earliest memory I have of learning about Black history in school must have been when I was in primary school, in a school in Hackney. So it's a predominantly Black school, and I had a Black teacher. I think she's the only Black teacher I've ever had. And we had a homework project to highlight a figure that we should celebrate for Black History Month. And my figure was Martin Luther King, someone from America. I had no idea about Black history, and I think that is the only time in school that we've touched on Black history, and it was because of a Black teacher. I went to school in a very white area in Essex, and we didn't talk about Black history at all. It wasn't until I went to university when there was lots of student campaigns and Black History Month was really highlighted by groups like the ACS and our BAME Society. That's when I realized, wow, like our education system is seriously lacking. Why is it that we only learn about this sort of stuff when it's Black people that are pushing for it? So that was my experience of Black history in education, unfortunately.
I would like to kind of comment on that, because I would say my primary school Black history was really fruitful. Just because the nature of where my primary school was in, it was in a very much Black and Asian community. So we reflected culture like it was part of the school's DNA, which it was very much built on that. So we didn't use Black History Month as a moment to celebrate Black culture. It was like every day of walking down the corridor, you could see the artwork of, you know, from the Asian community to the Black community to the white community to the Chinese community. That was a true reflection. So I was really brought into that, fruitful of knowing what culture meant as a child to grow up. I would say when I went to secondary school, that was a whole different thing, because, you know, when you taught to learn that, to both of you guys are, you know, have different beliefs and different upbringings, but the commonalities around sharing experience, to go to secondary school, that was so different, because I was told about the Victorians. I'm like, okay, is this just going to be a little part? No, I'm going to talk about the Victorians for the whole year. Do you know what I mean? So for me, I think there was a culture shock. So I wasn't deprived as Black history as a child in my primary education. I was deprived from the development at secondary. And that was the kind of concerning factor for me, because it really kind of enabled me to realize how we meant to learn about difference if we're being only told one thing. And those who are teaching history are the same people that are writing history, you know? So, and you know, so advocacy for history teachers weren't Black, they weren't Asian. They were pretty much, they were white, strong teachers, not disregarding it, but when you're going through that transition where primary school, that people that were teaching the cultures were those of different cultures, as well as, I remember one of my teachers were talking, she was a white teacher in primary school, and she went through the whole Martin Luther King speech. So it didn't require the Black teacher to tell that story. She took it on, and I learned from it, and then it was an okay way of expressing oneself. So I think the education system, it's crazy. It's crazy, man.
I'd say, oh, sorry.
Okay. Let's go, Florence. Carry on.
No, I'd say I'd agree with Joel in terms of the primary school experience being quite rich, because I grew up in Hackney, and at that time it was maybe a lot richer than it is now due to gentrification. But at the time, I was learning about, still it wasn't extensive, but I remember learning about Mary Seacole. I remember learning about Olado Equiano, which is still linked to some ideas around like slavery and serving people. Then it changed, I guess, considerably probably when I got to uni, where I feel like I had somewhat like more control over what I was learning, but simply because I specifically like looked for unis where I'd be able to learn about history in a way that was like a wider perspective. So I learned about like African politics and like all the, like early African civilizations, but that was like me having to go out my own way, and me there being a place that was the few places that existed that had that available, and the few modules that had that. But up until then, it wasn't really much of, it wasn't as extensive as it was in some places, and it like flitted in between up until I went to uni.
So there seems to be a common theme that although some people feel that they did have some experience of Black history in their schools, mainly primary school, that people have had to do their own research to find out about certain people. And when they have found out about certain people, they may not necessarily be from the UK, they are from America. So what do you all think about how we can ensure that the curriculum in the UK represents Black history for British people, and so that it doesn't represent just Martin Luther King, for example, who obviously is not from Britain?
I'll chime in on this. It's a difficult, I think, when we start talking about how an entire curriculum from a teacher's perspective, to have the most change, we need to start at the top if you wanted to have some sort of lasting impact in terms of the topics. If you talk about the history curriculum in particular, by the time kids get to year 9 and year 10, their history teacher will only be teaching what's going to be eventually coming up on the GCSE exams. If their GCSE exams are currently geared towards, at the moment, potentially US civil rights as being quite a pertinent Black-centric topic, or a topic to do with Black people in the US, nevertheless, then they teach to that. So in an ideal world, you would have people in those kind of exam boards or off-call, the EdXLs of the world, where they've got a more, in an ideal world, get a more diverse board of directors who can then have more of a say in, let's try and make the topics that let's go away from the stereotypical ones, and let's actually maybe introduce a different topic that involves Black people. But for me personally, and I was talking to my partner about this earlier, there's a lot, with history as an example, there's a lot more flexibility when you're in Key Stage 3. And there's no exams at the end of Key Stage 3. You're not prescribed to teach a certain topic because they will be tested. So I know from my own experience of talking to history teachers, if they want their kids to learn a certain topic, they can just go ahead and pretty much learn it as long as they get the say-so from their principal. So to have an impact on a kind of lower down level, you need either the Black history teachers or any teachers that are more interested in making a more diverse and inclusive curriculum to speak up and say, hold on, let's look at our curriculums in history and let's see how diverse are we, what representations are we kind of portraying for different cultures. Obviously, we're talking about Black culture right now, but every culture. Are we producing a rich curriculum that shows that history in Britain is not just about white contributions? So for me personally, it'll need a lot of teachers on the ground level, and if they're interested in the Black teachers, ethnic minority teachers, to stand up and challenge their seniors and say, hold on, can we, especially at Key Stage 3, where we've got more flexibility, can we make our provision more diverse? Because we should be able to, and we've got the capability. We're not limited by the rigidity of the exam board. So that's, for me, where the next step needs to come.
Yeah, I think that's true. I'd also like to add, I think that there needs to be like an acknowledgement that Black people exist in history, but also like in history and other subjects as well. Like we don't necessarily learn about like Black geographies, and you like isolate a lot of Black students from accessing humanities that way by like just pretending that it's like, if you're going to learn about history, you're going to learn about slavery, and if you want to hear about Black people being brutalized again and again, this is it, when actually that's not it. But yeah, I definitely agree that it needs to also have like teachers involved, also specifically considering the fact that teachers have had the same education we've had. Teachers need to be trained how to teach these subjects. So they need to have like specifically, like you need to be sensitive if you're going to talk about certain topics, and you need to have the high level of understanding and have that training to be able to like answer questions from students and also teach in a way that's knowledgeable, and so it's something that they don't do because they're trying to tick a box or because they're trying to please someone, which therefore does include SLT in schools and in educational institutions, being actively involved in like encouraging teachers and explaining to teachers, as well as having teachers encouraging each other why it's important to teach students, and like especially in areas where there are just lots of Black students. Yeah.
Sorry, can I respond to that really quickly? Is that all right? No, 100%. And I think especially because I came through Teach First, and I know now Teach First is ever expanding, and you end up putting teachers, young, vibrant teachers that want to affect change in schools all across the country. So if Teach First, for example, we had to do a whole bunch of essays and modules and assignments. If Teach First had a diversity and inclusion module as part of their training program, every single Teach First trainee had to go through some sort of analysis of their own specific curriculum area and how diverse the provision is. Maybe they could do a piece of work on that. That already makes every single potentially new teacher in the country more aware of potential lack, of when I say potential, just the lack thereof of diversity and inclusion across numerous subjects. So if something like Teach First could do that, then I think you could affect quite a lot of change, and you'd have young teachers that want to make a difference change with a different mindset to what's come before them. I think that could be really powerful.
I think That's a really good point, and it touches on something that I wanted to say about policy changes and also the burden that we put on Black teachers to do the work at grassroots level. So I think in order for us to make sure that we have Black history taught in schools, make sure that it's a British Black history, we need work at the grassroots level, so the teachers, campaigns, but we also need to make sure that the policy above, so the people that are writing the curriculum, the people, if you even go a bit further, like the government, we need to have support from the top, so it goes both ways, because one of the things that I'm very conscious of is the pressure that we put on teachers to do the work, and it's often work that they're not paid for in addition to like their normal role. And then also another thing that a point that was raised about making sure it's not just about history, the subject of history. One of the things that I'm doing at the moment in work in terms of a research project to do with universities' response to Black Lives Matter. One of the things that a university is looking at is making sure that in every single course that is taught at that university, that there is at least one lecture to do with Black people. So how Black people have affected people in that particular industry. And I think that is such an important point that it shouldn't just be left to the history subject. It needs to be widespread for it to truly make a difference.
Great. My next question actually comes from the audience. So the question is from David, and his question is, what is the primary piece of advice you could offer a student teacher in creating a more inclusive environment for Black pupils? So I'll start by answering this by saying, I think a key thing is sometimes teachers are working in locations which they're not from. For example, I'm from Essex, and if I was going to work in a school in Hackney, then I need to understand what are the issues which impact students in Hackney. Because if I don't understand the issues in Hackney, some of my methods, some of how I might approach the situation will be incorrect, because I'll be basing it on what I know from how schools and what the issues are in Essex. That's the first thing. You need to think about what are the locations which the students are coming from, and what are some common issues which they may be experiencing outside of school, which may be impacting their learning or their behaviour. And in terms of creating an inclusive environment, I think it's about a Black student should be treated exactly the same as their peer. So statistics have shown that Black students are predicted lower grades than their peers, even though when it comes to the actual exams, they will achieve exactly the same grades. So if a student knows their own ability, but they know that their grades, for example, are lower than their peers because they are Black, not because they've necessarily been told this, but they've got this understanding, their aspirations are going to be affected, their behaviour is going to be worse because they're going to think, well, my teacher doesn't believe in me, so what's the point? So I think it's about actually raising the aspirations of all of your students and treating all your students the same. And when a Black student sees that they're treated the same as their peer, that is creating an inclusive environment because they're being treated equally. Also, things which I've seen in schools where two students are both being equally disruptive, but a Black student will be told, oh, you're being very aggressive, or you're being very disrespectful. Now, they're both probably being disrespectful, they're both being aggressive, but why is it that Black student that is singled out? So I think it's very important the labels that we're using as well, that's what causes an environment not to be inclusive. So if both students are being disruptive, say to both students, your behaviour is inappropriate. And when a Black student sees that actually they're being treated equally in terms of their inappropriate behaviour, that is what's going to create an inclusive environment. I'd just like to pass it over now to the panellists.
I'm gonna go. I think that a key way, and I always say this, is we can, where there's room, I think that there should be efforts made to, firstly, like make sure that students feel like comfortable in their environment as well. So like linked to what you're saying, like if they're feeling like they're always going to be targeted and pointed out, then they're not going to feel comfortable. So if things are going on elsewhere that have nothing to do with school, they're not going to feel like school is a safe place, where school should be a safe place, and school should be somewhere that people want to go to, not something that you have to do in the week. Like, you know, we have this notion of like school being this like or like work being somewhere that we hate, and then we like the weekends, and actually you can like school as well. But also you can change the way, where there's room to, I feel like there should be efforts made to change the way you assess people. I feel like we're always assessing people in the same way. We're always making people write like the traditional aspects of like traditional like just writing essays or writing paragraphs, and without like using other parts of your brain. And by actually allowing students to use other parts of your brain, you can see how they can enjoy different aspects and explore different things that they might like and they might not even know they like. Especially though, even down to like the way we write essays or the way we write paragraphs, it always tends to be this like objective view. But when you talk about some things in Black history, it's not objective as a Black person. You can't see it as objective, and there's no such thing as objectivity, even as someone who isn't Black, just because it's that they don't have that necessarily have that might not necessarily have that personal connection. So I think that should also be taken into account if we do when you do assess people through essays, etc. But also changing it around, there can be like various different ways. I know that even up to university, I was still like giving the opportunities to like write posters, which sounds really strange and like not that academic, but actually it makes you force like how can I like change all this like academic information in a way that's like plain English that everyone will understand, in a way that is actually attractive and like helps them, and linking it to other things I know, like things to pop culture, because things always link, like people have always existed, and you can't just talk about theories and ideas and like big like academic topics regardless of what level it's at without involving people. So by linking it to like things that are actually going on in people's lives and actually going on in people's areas, I think that's another way of doing that. I think I talked a little bit around the topic, so apologies, but I think yes, just generally like trying to be more inclusive by making it like more specific to the student, and like seeing how like the wider experiences of the student will be involved in the way that they learn.
I think another way that you can help make environments more inclusive for students is being able to build in a system where Black students can openly express what their experience is like in the school. So for an example, if a Black student is experiencing racism and they have no idea who to talk to about it or how to report it, that will build up a negative energy, and it will also make them feel not safe in their school. If a school has more transparency around the policies that they have around, say, reporting things if things happen, then I think that can help foster a sense of belief in the environment that the Black student is in, knowing that if anything happens, then they are able to have a voice. And even going before, if anything was to happen in terms of racism in their experience, having a way that they can submit ongoing feedback without fear of being judged or without fear of having their assessments impacted. I think that is another way that can help build an inclusive environment in schools.
I just want to just touch upon that, because I think for me, like, I've kind of adopted this model called the listen, learn, lead, live life model. You know, we need to listen to young people, we need to listen to students, and those teachers need to learn from them to adapt the models and the infrastructures to work for them. Because if a teacher's meant to lead them through an education system, we need to go back to that listening part and keep revisiting it until we get them through by enabling them to reach their potential. Because many teachers are not equipped to listen, and listen through the lens of Black students. They see that unconscious bias of going, okay, the problem, here we go again, they're moaning, or they're passionate, or they're ambitious. But they don't listen to them to understand the pain and the suffering, and understanding what our ancestors have gone through for them to be reacting in a very similar way, or reacting in a way that their entitlement to education is a different kind of level of journey. Because we want them to live a better life, but the education system is not listening enough to enable our Black kings and queens to get the knowledge which they deserve. And it's not knowledge which is new to them, it's the additionality of knowledge which they can take on to be the next professor, to be the lecturer, to be the businessman. Because I feel sometimes that's where schools' inclusion to Black students is very different, because they've still got this perception that they're gonna be the athlete, the musician, yeah, that is it. And if you do anything different, that's the out of the norm. So I think we need to listen. So teachers need to listen a little bit more and listen to the community that they're coming from, rather than listening to what stats say on a piece of paper, or that teacher gossiping in the staff room. Oh, that student does that. Oh, don't be worried about that because they're brothers in a gang. Nah, man, we need to change the perception and the model of how teachers need to teach. So I really agree what Khalid is saying, that we need to invest in a model which ingrains culture or cultural behavior change at the moment of teachers going into that stage of training. But it has to be an ongoing thing of development, because it can't be a tick box to say, I've done it. No, I need to sustain it. That is the key thing. So I believe if we can get that right, we can go for that model of listen, learn, lead, and live a better life for our students.
Yeah, just to finish off from my perspective. So going back to the questions about what advice would I give a student teacher to make a more inclusive environment for Black students in particular. I don't think for me personally, there's not a particular way you need to do that's only for Black kids. There's a way to be inclusive for all kids. And if you apply this approach, then Black kids and every other kid will flourish. And it's exactly what Jarrell said. Because when I did my teacher training, they put a lot of emphasis on pedagogy, on the academic focus. They don't say much about, it's probably worth you get to know your kids. They don't ever say, like, there's no emphasis. In my teacher training, there was no emphasis about know your kids, get to know their interests, find out what makes them tick, find out what their interests are, what they do outside of school if you can. Show them that you're more interested in them on a human level. Don't just see them as a person sat in a classroom and you're there as just this fountain of knowledge to just spew out all you know. Because you're not anyone. They don't have to. A lot of students, not just Black kids, any kids, don't have to listen to you. They won't listen to you unless they feel like it's a two-way thing. And kids are human beings. They want to be supported. They want to be listened to. They want to feel like their opinion matters. And that's the same with Black kids, white kids, Asian kids. Every single student feels exactly the same way. So if this is a trainee teacher listening to this who's just starting out, you've got to know your pedagogy. I get that. But there's no point trying to teach a class that aren't going to listen. And they're not going to listen if they don't feel like you're even invested in them as humans. So that's my main piece of advice for anyone starting out teaching, is show them, either it's in the lesson, outside the lesson, break time, before school, after school. Show them that they're more than just your maths kid. Show them that you know their name and that you're interested in them as a person, and you'll get some buyback. It may take some time, but show them that you're willing to work with them and you're not just some person at the front that's not really interested in get to know them at all.
Great. And obviously at the moment it's Black History Month. So some of the questions from the audience has been about how can I ensure that that Black History Month is celebrated in the school. But what I want to pose to the panelists is, how can we ensure that Black people in general are celebrated within schools, whether that's the students, the history of Black people, what can schools do and what can teachers do to ensure this happens?
There's a lot of, I'm going to feel some silence. There's a lot of silence. It's a tough question. I think from my perspective, something that I've done most recently, and I come from my school at the moment is very diverse, and we're a very new school, so we've only got 2-year groups. So we're in a very privileged position where we can form a culture, and we've got the right people at the table who have got a similar mindset in terms of trying to make a new curriculum that actually appeals to more than just your standard white middle class or white working class kid, essentially. So from a kind of grassroots level, you need progressively minded teachers, like I said at the beginning, and you can change. And then and I think for me, it's a long process, because you're going to need change to happen in a school. And then we're part of an academy. So then other academies see what we've done and see the impact, and maybe it will cascade through. So I don't have an answer to a kind of holistic view, but I know at school level, I've had conversations with our history department, I've had conversations with our English department. And because we've got such a small unit, we're able to affect change rapidly. And because we've only got Key Stage 3 students, we're able to affect the change without any limitations by an exam board. And our school's being looked at as a kind of beacon of, I don't know, just developed or progressive learning. And then if that then passes to another school, another area, it can then cascade. It's not a quick fix, but I think that's the best way for me personally to affect change in my school, with the hope of it then having a benefit and I've lost my words, for them benefiting other schools in the local community, basically.
And I think kind of what you said, Khalid, leads on to a question that we've just received from someone. So they're a primary school teacher, and they want to know, what would we suggest in terms of overcoming the challenges of some parents who have negative perceptions and influence upon their children towards Black children? So just to rephrase that, basically, what should a teacher do if some of the reasons why there's negative perceptions towards Black children at school is because of the parents? This teacher wants to know what they should do. And I think personally, from my point of view, I think it's about challenging those perceptions, not necessarily the parent, but if you see, for instance, that parent's child saying something inappropriate to a Black child, it's about speaking to that child saying, well, why have you said that? What do you think about that? Because first of all, you're allowing that Black child to let them know that you're not going to accept that behavior. But secondly, you're actually educating that child to let them know that's okay for you to say that. And I think sometimes children are like sponges. They absorb information. If nobody challenges these views, then they're going to go throughout life thinking, oh, this is the correct way of thinking. So as a teacher, I would say that it's really important that you challenge those views. And if the child is repeatedly saying, oh, this is what my mum said to me, this is what my dad said to me, maybe then a further conversation needs to be had. Because if it's, for example, these views are really extreme and they're saying these views repeatedly, that could be seen as a sign of bullying. Obviously, maybe they're being racist towards that child. So I think it's very important to educate the person who's saying these things, but also speaking to the Black person who's having these things said to them to make sure that they feel supported. Because I can't count the number of times a young person said to me, I've been bullied or I've experienced racism, my teacher didn't do anything. It made me feel unlistened to, it made me feel unheard. And I'm sure you don't want to be part of the problem, you want to be part of the solutions. It's about giving that young person the sense of that you care and that you're here to support them and that you have heard what's happened and you're not going to stand for it, basically.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, speaking obviously as a teacher, so my role is, I deal with a lot of instances of any kind of bullying or discrimination or racism, that kind of stuff. It kind of falls on my lap, and obviously the other head of year as well. And it's teachers in all schools need to put racism on the same kind of footing as physical violence, for example, or things in schools where there's harsh sanctions in place if you have a fight in school, for example. But does every school give harsh sanctions for another kid calling a black kid the N-word, for example? Does that happen? I don't know. I'm not in every school. But what I can say from my perspective is, if we have any instances of racism or racial discrimination from both Black, Asian, or it could be from Black to white, all different forms of racism needs to be treated with the same kind of vim, let's call it, with the same kind of passion, saying, you know what, we're in 2020 now, we need to be challenging every single prejudice that people have got, because a lot of it, like you said, is ingrained and then gets passed down from generations, and kids that are like 11, 12 don't actually think it's that bad because they hear it all the time, or they're influenced by what their parents have said at home. And I can speak to a recent incident happened last year. So we had an Asian kid who would use the N-word to a Black kid. And then I had parents in, we had principal there, principal's white, which is always good to have like someone championing the cause that isn't Black. So you got the principal in there, myself, the parents were brought in, the kid was brought in, and we had a really frank and there was obviously harsh sanctions put in place, but a really, really frank discussion to the point where the kid was in tears, unfortunately, because he'd never really understood the power of the word, or where the word came from, or its history, or its impact on Black people. So he had no idea. It's just he heard it and he thought it was a cool thing to say, or he thought people just say it. And after that education, of course, that's only one person. But if bit by bit, everyone's having the same conversations or similar conversations across the country, then eventually things, like we had with all the Black Lives Matter stuff going on early in the year, if these conversations start to happen in little pockets, all these pockets start to unite. And you won't get a change overnight, but eventually, if we never let the conversation rest, if we never just, you only said the M word, it's fine, it's happened before. If we start having that approach, then we're going backwards. And I think every single teacher, Black, white, Asian, whoever, needs to challenge every single form of racism, not just to Black people, every single form of racism, and realize, so kids growing up realize it's that bad. Because I think it's cool nowadays to be offensive. It's cool to cuss people, and fair enough, but racism is one step too far, and they need to realize that. And it's on teachers, it's on the educators, it's on us, and also obviously their parents who may need re-educating to shape their minds, and hopefully they can then feed into the next generations to come.
Jarrell or Florence, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
I would like to, sorry people.
Of course.
That's quite fueled, man. I don't want to take away from the moment that he said, because I think it's important to acknowledge that he's a practitioner in his own right. This is his day to day. And I think for me, as not working in direct mainstream education in the same way anymore, yours is more relevant, yours is more contemporary, where when I go in my different roles, I only see a snapshot, or if I'm coming to kind of resolve a situation in terms of advocating for the rights for a young person, or ensuring that the young person's rights are not being abused or being ignored, So I think all I can say to that is that it's more about people being aware of the injustices and the issues regarding inequalities. And if those are not being addressed within that current system, it's the rights of the parent, the carer, the guardian to really upstand the education system to make sure that is not right. Because if the voice of the child is not being addressed in the way that it should be, or the fruit for that education is not coming, as part of their entitlement, it needs to be addressed. And so I don't want to add more to what he said, because it's great. It's great stuff, man. So thank you, Sabrina.
Okay, I am conscious that we have spoken a lot about school, so I'm going to change the topic, not from schools, so we can talk about how can we ensure that Black people are celebrated in youth organisations, in museums, let's say in churches, so let's say in society. So I feel we can all contribute a little bit more if we take it away from directly just speaking about schools.
I'll go then. So how do we make sure that Black people are more celebrated everywhere? Well, I think if you go back to why are we not celebrated everywhere? I would say obviously the main cause is racism. So how do you make sure that in all of these places that all of these places are actively anti-racist, and then they realize what is the effect of not making sure that there is representation there, and that the Black people that they do already have in their organizations, what is the effect of them not being recognized for their hard work? So I think one of the main things is making sure people realize the negative effect of what happens when you don't celebrate these people. I think if you make sure that you have more Black people at all levels in all of these organizations, then you have more people in the room saying the question, oh, why haven't we done this? Why haven't we celebrated that person for that work? Because when you have less Black people in these rooms that are making these decisions on how to celebrate Black people, then no one will pick it up. And then on the flip side of it, you need to have campaigns, grassroots campaigns that are also fighting for it. So you need people in the room, but you also need people that are outside of the door saying this is wrong, you need to make sure that Black people are being able to see themselves celebrated, and that fuels positive momentum. And then you have more Black people realizing that if I do good work, then I will be able to get the recognition that I deserve. So in terms of getting more Black people recognized, I think it works. You need to have someone in the room, so that's getting more Black people at all levels, asking those questions in those rooms where those decisions are being made. And then also people on the other side saying, why isn't this happening? So having community campaigns that are able to say, why isn't it happening? So I think those two things are ways that we can make sure that we have more Black people represented and celebrated.
And I've got a follow-up question regarding that. So this is from the audience. This is from someone called Chloe, and she's written, what are your opinions on why educators using our platform to promote anti-racism? Do you think we are likely to meet resistance from our BAME pupils and colleagues? And it's obviously really interesting because you've obviously just said that you think it's really important that people do speak up and people do say, you know, I deserve a place at this table and so does my peer, etc. Do you have any response to Chloe's question?
I was just going to say, could you repeat that question because it cut out a little bit?
Oh yeah,
sorry.
Sure. So what are your opinions on white educators using our platform to promote anti-racism? Do you think we are likely to meet resistance from our BAME pupils and colleagues?
That's a really good question. And it's something that I've actually been discussing recently with people in terms of delivering anti-racism training. I think that when you will only meet resistance when you aren't talking to Black people and other BAME colleagues or students. You need to make sure that your idea of anti-racism isn't something that's just fueled by what you think is right. You need to make sure that you're talking to the people around you, and so that it's the most effective way that example that I can give you is, let's say a school runs this campaign for Black History Month, and because they see that as being like anti-racist, and then there have been problems of racism in the past, but they've never addressed it. If they spoke to Black people beforehand in that environment and they were able to say, for this particular organization, you haven't addressed these problems that have arisen in the past, so when you do try and do something, say for Black History Month, it kind of looks like there's no credibility there. You would be able to know that if you spoke to the Black people around you. So we need to have white allies that are supporting us in this mission of being anti-racist, because we can't do it on our own, but it needs to be done together. White allies are in those rooms of power. We need to get more Black people in there. We need those white allies to help pull Black people into those rooms so they can deliver anti-racist mission together. So I think it is a good thing for a white ally, so a white teacher or whoever, to help with anti-racism, but it needs to not be your idea of what anti-racism should be. It needs to be a collective thing with Black people and other BAME people too.
I'd also like to add on that, I think you also need to like acknowledge your position as like a white person. Like you can't, I feel like it's very easy to get like the slip and slide between of like, oh, I don't want to take up too much space, but I do think that, and there are some cases and there are situations where if you don't do something, nobody's going to do something, and so it's like, oh, I'd rather be me than do nothing. But I also think it's okay to also explain to students, because I feel like sometimes people, it can seem like, oh, I have to be the teacher, I have to therefore, like when I've been in my experience of like doing teaching, but like coming in at selective times and I'm getting to leave, it's okay to explain to students, I know I'm not Black, I know I don't have the same experiences, but I do still think this is important. And literally talk to them, because they are people and they do understand what you're saying in those respects, because yeah, they have those experiences, and therefore they also know that you don't think that you're like the be all and end all of the knowledge of anti-racism which you're not. So I think understanding like it's okay to be like somewhat fallible, though it can seem scary in a room full of students. It's okay to do that, and it's actually necessary to, in order for your information to be translated in the way it wants to be taken and the way you want it to be taken. I also think in society, adding on to that, I think in society in general, I think that I agree in terms of like grassroots organizations from the outside hitting in, because I feel like if it wasn't for like the masses of protests that were happening earlier in the year with Black Lives Matter, we wouldn't have as many organizations and institutions now like hurrying to search for Black people as they are now and as they have been, which has been great because it's given people opportunities, but it's not something that happens all the time, and it's something that people have been like, how do we have this something that is sustained? So those people like on the inside, so there are actually people on the inside, and there can always be people on the inside rather than the people who got signed on for contracts in the last month, therefore their contract running out next year, and then therefore there's no one Black in the room again. So I think there needs to be like I don't know, a paradigm shift, which is like really big and will take a lot more time to change people's perceptions in institutions, people at the top of these institutions in society, to change their perceptions of what they need in their businesses or what they need in their institutions, which also means acknowledging Black people as just people in terms of like being like, if you have a more diverse workforce, if you have people in your organizations who aren't the same, you genuinely will get different results. Like we've seen there's been cases like, even when it came to the case of whether we should go to a war or whether we should go to war in Iraq, that like what the report at the end read out, that one of the problems was that everyone who was working in the civil service was exactly the same, and so everyone voted the same. No, there weren't that many oppositional views, and by actually, if people were different, there would be more oppositional views. There would be, oh, okay, if you want to do this, why don't we do it this way? Why do we do it the other way? So you might have to like also, because of the way the world works, convince people like it's actually beneficial for you, like having people who don't look like you, don't act like you, don't have the same background as you, would be beneficial to your organization. So there's like different ways you can do it, and then once you get people in the door, again, it's just then you can like have the like in-depth training, in-depth changing. But yeah, the system we're living in means you have to kind of also, I feel like, has to be flexible, or like try and be somewhat cunning in the way we do things.
Yeah, I massively agree with both points Florence and Asaro made. I think my response to this is white educators would find it, I think it's dodgy ground personally for white educators to try and lead a lesson as an educator on anti-racism. That's not the approach you should be going for. If you're a white educator wanting to talk about or have a discussion, then you need to see yourself as more of a facilitator of a discussion about anti-racism. Any person, no matter what background, can be a facilitator of a discussion, can ask the questions, can model to non-Black students how to be open to hearing about quite unnerving things about maybe their own. So people, when they talk about white privilege, for example, if you're a white educator, being able to model that you can, you know what, yeah, I accept that I have got certain privileges that have been afforded to me, such as X, Y, Z, because of the color of my skin. And if you have those conversations with kids of all backgrounds and you model for them how to be open and transparent and honest about your own prejudices, your own potentially unconscious biases, all that kind of stuff, then their young minds will see it and they can potentially start to mimic that same approach to being open and actually addressing and kind of realizing, yeah, I have got this perception about Black people I've always had. Why is that? It's because of X, Y, Z. And I think, so in response to that question, if you're a white educator, see yourself as a facilitator and see yourself as just someone to be in the room to guide a discussion and allow students who are the ones affected by racism to speak about it and have their opinions respected by everyone, and just be there to listen and be there to learn. And if a lot of white educators do that, or white teachers do that, or non-Black teachers do that, then again, it will start to filter through and it could start have a real impact on young people. And then as they get older, we can maybe start seeing a lot more change in people's perceptions.
I'm going to go to a question from the audience. So the question is, often racism is subtle and said outside of school and teachers find out about it after. So therefore, what strategies would the panellists prioritise for schools in dealing with this? And if I was to answer this first of all, I would say as soon as you hear about it, follow it up. The worst thing to do would be to hear about it and then don't do anything about it, because again, that's leaving that young Black person feeling unheard, unlistened to, and frankly, they would feel like you don't care. So it doesn't matter whether it happens outside of school. It's the same principle, for example, if a young person went and stole something from the shop and the shop informed the school would deal with it, because obviously you're representing the school, representing the uniform, and you've got a reputation to uphold. And I think the main thing is just to deal with racism, whether it's subtle or not, in the same way that you would deal with homophobic comments or the same way you would deal with bullying. I think sometimes we feel like we have to deal with racism and we're not really sure how to deal with it. But racism is just another form of discrimination because it's based on someone's race. And I think sometimes people may feel a bit cautious and they don't know how to handle the topic. And if that's because you don't know how to handle the topic, that would then come down to you need to make sure that you feel comfortable enough to have those conversations, because if you don't, that young person that you're speaking to is going to pick that up, and therefore the conversation isn't going to be as fruitful as it could be. When you're having also those conversations with the young people who may be displaying racist language, etc., I think it's a chance to educate them. And this comes back to a point before, which I think Khalid or Florence said, because if someone doesn't necessarily understand how what they're saying is wrong, they're going to continue saying it, and then other people are going to pick up on it, and they may go throughout their life having certain mindsets about Black people. So in terms of strategies that a school should have, it should be the same strategies which you would apply to bullying, homophobia, or if a fight happened outside of school, it should have the same amount of importance and significance. And if it doesn't, then I would say that you would need to reflect on why doesn't it have the same amount of importance. Is it because you don't feel comfortable? If you don't feel comfortable, maybe there's further knowledge you need to seek or further training you need to do, or is it that you feel the school doesn't prioritise racism? And if that's the issue, then obviously that's an issue within itself, because therefore there's certain young people in your school who won't feel like it's an inclusive environment and therefore they won't thrive. So I think it's about reflecting on why this question has been asked in the first place. Where does this question come from? And then thinking about what solutions within your school environment you think you could implement to help you overcome this. Do any of the other panelists have anything to add in terms of that question?
I just want to add one thing quite quickly. So I completely agree with everything that you said about like how to handle it. And then on the point about if the school doesn't take it seriously, one of the things that I would say to the teacher that you could do to help is ask your school, is there an anti-discrimination policy? And in that policy, does it detail what to do when discrimination or racism happens, and like how to formally deal with it? And so if there is a policy like that is visible to everyone, hopefully that's the case, that's where you can start to see if the school would take it seriously. And obviously the school should take it seriously. I mean, racism, whether it's covert or overt, should be taken seriously. And so one thing that I think that you could do in a practical way to help with this situation is ask, does your school have an anti-discrimination policy? What does it say about racism? What are the steps there? And if there isn't one, or if it's not good enough, then you can help, you can work with what has just been said about making sure that you deal with it, whether it's outside of school and treating it in the same way as, say, the shop, if someone stole something in a shop, and yeah. So yeah, basically that.
And off the back of that, another question just come up saying, how would you recommend addressing racism in schools which are exclusively or almost exclusively white? And I think with that question, I think it would be a similar answer to what personally I said before. I think the main thing which Black people are aware of is that in most jobs, predominantly, it will always be white people. So therefore it's harder to kind of deal with issues of discrimination because they are the minority. But if you're recognizing that you're working in an all-white school and racism is happening, that's the first step in recognising that there's an issue. And the next step would be, well, what can we do about this issue? I don't think it should matter whether the schools are white. Obviously, it'll be harder because there may be some people in that school who may not understand compared to if the school had more black people or more minority ethnic people in the school. But I think if you recognise that there's an issue of racism in your school, your manager should listen or the head teacher should listen. And if they won't, you've got the school governors. A school needs to be held account. And if racism is an issue, which you've noticed in your school, and from your question, it seems that you're highlighting, you think it's a bigger issue because the schools are white, then there's something that can be done. And I think sometimes we feel like, oh, well, I'm just me, so I can't do anything. But if everyone thought like that, nothing would ever change. So I think it's about taking that small step and also standing up for the rights of the black students in your school who probably do not have a voice if they are in an all-white school. And if they know that something has changed because you've recognised that there's an issue, that is something that that young black person will remember for the rest of their lives, knowing that actually you went out of your way to say this isn't right and I'm actually going to put myself out there to do something about it. And it also goes back to the point before about having white allies. You've recognised this is a problem from your school, and I'm assuming you're a white person as well, so therefore you can use your position, whatever that position is within the school, to influence your peers and say, hey, this isn't cool and we need to do something about it. It'd be much harder if it was a black teacher, for example, saying to their white colleagues, their white manager, oh my gosh, this is an issue in the school. So I think you should use what you've witnessed in the school, use your position of power and use it to make a positive difference, because the worst thing that you can do is to do nothing, even though you know there's an issue there. Does anybody else have anything they want to add?
Yeah, also for me, I think I used to work in a predominantly white school actually. Luckily, I never was aware of race. I was aware of racism, and it wasn't ever targeted towards black people. It was more towards Asian actually, based on the community where my school was. So I think one thing that we obviously did as staff, all members of staff challenged it. But one thing that I think, if the school teachers are predominantly white, the students are predominantly white, boards are predominantly white, then it's not, the chance of being able to have a relevant perspective on it is slim. But there are people out in the world you can bring in and do training, like little sessions with groups of kids or groups of students. So if you're working in a school where racism is an issue, my advice is look outside of the school or communicate with anyone who works in different schools and see if you can find, there are people that are trained to lead diversity workshops, they're trained to lead workshops on microaggressions, on inclusion, all that kind of stuff. They do workshops for adults. So there are a lot of organizations out there that do work on this. So why not bring those in instead? If no one in your teaching cohort or your staff can lead it because they don't consider themselves to be well versed in it, fair enough. But there are people out there, so there's no excuse in my opinion. If racism is an issue and you don't think the staff are able to deal with it because they're also white and maybe they don't have a kind of strong enough voice in it, then get someone else in. And then my advice is don't do whole assemblies, because whole assemblies dilute the message. Yeah, do small groups, do workshops, do things where you can actually have a conversation with people and challenge perceptions, as opposed to, let me just deliver a PowerPoint and you guys can all hear the PowerPoint and never be able to ask me any questions. So if you're in that kind of school, get someone in and pick groups of kids. Doesn't need to be, it could be random. Generally, it could be random. Don't just say, oh, I'm gonna get all these 10 kids because I know they've had some racist trends in the past. Get a random selection of kids and stagger it through the year or through the term and say, we're gonna have a focus on this. And then I guarantee there'll be a ripple effect and conversations will start to happen. And those people that were kind of the staunch racists may not ever be able to be changed. But the middle of the ground people who kind of wavered and thought this ain't really right, then they're gonna start falling onto the right side of the kind of moral line, if you want to call it. So that's my advice. If there's no one in-house, bring someone in and make it small. Don't do assemblies, because assemblies have very little impact on the cohort.
And based on what you just said, Khalil, several people have asked all the panelists if they've got any recommendations for anyone that could deliver, for example, anti-racism training, or whether they could deliver diversity and inclusion training. So do any of the panelists have any organisations which they would like to recommend?
Before we say about recommendations, I think we just need to establish around how we can utilise communities a lot better, because I think communities that sit around the school setting itself in terms of the voluntary sector can play a leading part to really start to wipe out some of these issues. Because I think we can't timely just always provide training. It's about behavior change. It's about changing the landscape or the ecology, because if a person school is situated in the area of racist mentality, that's all they're going to know. But if you break the cycle around changing that behavior of that community, you start to ingrain something different, because training, I call that parachute. That should be one of the last results. The fact of process of a longitude of engagement and assessing the need of the area and that whole behavior change model, it's going to take time. And I think firstly, we need to take time to assess what's happening in that particular area. So like, for example, my organization, we've developed a project called MAN, which is all about developing young black men to reach their aspiration and accelerate them. So within the school setting, that they might be low achieving, and due to COVID, they're kind of seen as being behind. But as a community, we need to support them. We need to support them because we know the school's not going to fix them straight away. The school's not going to be able to mold them and develop them or address those issues. So we're fueling those young people up to address these issues. What does racism look like? How do you talk about racism in your school? So we're fueling them to be the allies in our sense, to be the advocates which are training their schools how to do things differently. And that's taken me on a journey with one of our funders, the lottery, to really champion that approach of trying to navigate young people to be in the lead. So because sometimes we've got people in power that are leading bull, and I'm talking bull because the fact of it is we need to change that model. We need to change that model that we bring people with us rather than parachuting because they're just great trainers. I think great trainers, there's a time and a place for it, but it don't create systemic change that we're fighting for right about now. We want systemic change. We want change that's going to be our ancestors were fighting for and we're still fighting for now. How can we change that now? Because that's the key thing. And like when people are saying about training, we're the flavor of the month. It's Black History Month. We've had Black History Month extended from March till now. It doesn't, so what's going to happen after? So we need to build something different that mobilizes people to kind of go, okay, we need to work with our community. We need to bring those inspirational community leaders into our school. We need to develop this. One training does not work straight away. Sorry, that was my moment. I had to kind of jump in on that moment. Sorry.
Thanks, Jarell. I agree with what you're saying, but does anyone have any recommendations for those who do want to know about organisations?
I have two recommendations. First quick one is me. I do anti-racism training and workshops in education. But then another organisation that does really good work is called Black Impact. And they work with supporting Black people in education and also Black leaders as well, Black student leaders specifically. And they do a whole bunch of things. So they'll be able to do training, they do leadership workshops and stuff like that. So Black Impact is another a really good organisation that does good work for on that topic. Yeah.
Does anyone else have any recommendations?
I would recommend BLAM, which I too work for. BLAM, we like give training to teachers about, well, it's like a mixture, so it's training about how to like address racism in the classroom, anti-racist teaching and like methods, and also like examples of how to implement range of different types of like, including like Black narratives and Black focuses in a range of different subjects that like literally from like maths, art, English, as well as like history and other humanities. I think also someone who does anti-racism training for students as well as teachers. I don't know what their Twitter handle is. I think their name is Bilal, and they seem to do training. If you type in, I don't know, I'll find it and say it in the chat, but I assume that they do good work on that. Yeah, if you know, you say.
So if you're talking about Bilal Harry Khan by any chance, or
yeah,
so he's small world. So he's a very good friend of mine. We went to Yeah, we went to the same secondary school, and we also went to Cambridge together as well. So I was gonna name drop him. I don't think he's watching today, but I was gonna name drop him. So yeah, he's either you can look at his Insta is Insta by Bilal, his Twitter is Tweets by Bilal, and I think he's also on LinkedIn. All his work at the moment after he left uni is doing numerous diversity training he's on training for police, for example, loads different organizations around diversity and inclusion. And he wants to get more into schools and that kind of stuff as well. So if you're looking for someone, I'll tell him I've name dropped him in this as well. So if you're looking for someone to do any kind of training, he's one that's in that field at the moment. So we're happy to get a little bit more work. But yeah, Bilal Harry Khan, look at him on LinkedIn. He does all work on this kind of stuff.
And now I want to ask all the panelists if you could explain to the audience about, not talking about Black History Month, but just in general, what was your experience like as a Black young person in England at school?
Okay, at school, okay, which part of school? Is it primary, is it education, or is it university? What's the learning journey? Which part?
If you give us just one of them, so either primary, secondary, university, pick one.
All right, cool. I want to talk about university because I went to a predominantly white university, and I would say I felt very, 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 very conscious of who I was. I felt very like, walked into SU, oh my, I felt like I had these staring eyes. I felt like I always had staring eyes. But I don't know if the staring eyes was me thinking that people were looking at me all the time, or that people were kind of going, wow, look at this Black man, look at him, do you know what I mean? And grinding for himself, do you know what I mean? Because I first thought like I was going to be a victim of trying to do better for myself. So my university experience was that first perception for me of feeling quite different, a lot different from living in Birmingham, coming straight down to the coast, and that coast looking very different. So my education experience was very interesting because I did a lot of arts and stuff. So arts is my background. It's, you know, this is what I love, what I do. And for many, even down to that, people in contemporary dance, and that's what I specialize in, there's not many key Black dancers in that kind of contemporary world, when contemporary Britain should reflect those amazing Black dancers in the contemporary field. But I was always feeling like I was having to tell my story each time so that people kind of got it. So it got to a point when I did my master's, I actually said, you know what, for me to leave this university, I'm gonna leave my autobiography here so that it becomes a research project. So you're not going to forget me. Do you know what I mean? You are not going to forget me. And I'm gonna tell you about the struggles of being Black, being the struggles of going through depression, the struggles of actually being here, and the kind of depression that kind of it brought with it. Do you know what I mean? So I would say that until I really realized that the education system is broken, I needed to kind of find a way of fixing it to meet and work for me really than anything. So I would say that I've just tried to celebrate at university. I don't feel like the university might be in a different stance where it is now, but at least I can say that I've left my research there so people can go in the library and look at it. So I'm in part of history, do you know what I mean? So my moment of time is still in history rather than it being taken away from me, where many universities try and do that sometimes.
And we've got time for one more panelist to answer that question, please.
I'll go. Oh, sorry, you go.
Okay, is that okay? Okay, right, sorry. Yeah, I've just finished university, which is why I was like, I want to talk about university. Yeah, so my experience was what I think it was quite similar, but kind of different. So I specifically want to talk about like I studied a very 3 different types. So had politics and history essentially, and as my experience as a Black person, I think it was sometimes I felt like I had to like fight with people sometimes in class because I was talking about politics, talking about history, and specifically going to modules where I was like, okay, yeah, we're going to talk about racism, let's do it. And sometimes being sometimes being the person who's always putting their hand up, which I think is, I encourage students to do that. I especially encourage Black students to do that. Like consistently put your hand up, consistently like don't be afraid to constantly talk if that's what you want to do. But I feel like that's something that I had to like try and deal with, especially being in Liverpool, which is very different from Hackney, very different from London, a very white space, where I was like, even up to like, I found it kind of difficult to also be outside of my academic learning, in terms of like the SU and like joining societies and like just being in Liverpool in general. It was quite difficult, but I also know that other people didn't have exactly quite the same experience. I personally don't think I'll be moving to Liverpool, but I do know that some people have had pleasant experiences. Yeah, I think it depends, like, because I felt, and I don't know if this happens to other students, but I feel like going somewhere where there tends to be, where it is a white space, means that you kind of like go into your Blackness more. So I feel like I was like exploring more of myself. I was becoming like, oh wait, no, like I really, places where, especially like if I was in school when I was younger, I would feel like maybe I'm doubting this, maybe this isn't happening. When I got to uni, I was like, this is definitely happening, I'm definitely going to be loud about it. So as much as it kind of can be isolating sometimes, I think it helped to build character. It sounds very terrible, but helped me to establish myself as someone who was like dealing with Black histories and talking about it and not being afraid. Something really significant, I'm going to stop, but something really significant I did at university, all my analysis was linked to like what I do in life. So I wrote, if I had to write essays about the international political economy, I talked about it to do with grime music, and I got good grades. I got a first. Like I talked about, if I was talking about social politics, I was talking about Twitter using at the time like what was relevant at the time, and it was analysis that was seen as good, seen as like important, and also because I was able to maneuver and manipulate something I already know, rather than try and fit the box of just talking about China when we're talking about international politics, because although that is important, you have to link it to the world around you. Yes, that was my experience at university. I thought I would share.
And so we've got a question from the audience. This is from David, and I want everyone to just give one piece of advice in one sentence. So, there are more social issues than there are solutions. There are many people that want to do more, but just don't know where to start. What would your advice be to them in helping make a difference in our young communities?
I would say look at your old role and see what your skill set is, and then you can decide how best you can help people. So if your skill set is, oh, you're a really good campaigner, you can do that. If you're a really good educator, you can do that to help people. So look at your own skill set to see how you can help people in the best way.
Jarell, what would you say? You're muted.
Sorry, can you repeat the question again for me, please? Sorry, I was ingrained in what she was saying, but so I forgot the.
Yeah, 1 second.
Sorry.
So there are more social issues than there are solutions. There are many people that want to do more, but just don't know where to start. What would your one piece of advice be in helping them make a difference in our young communities? So in one sentence, what would your piece of advice be?
Oh gosh, that's quite hard. I would say it's that thing around looking inside yourself, but I think it's more about stop, breathe, and just be observant, because sometimes we don't need to be trying to always be busy. So it's that sense of it's okay just to watch what's going on and then react as a second response sometimes rather than your first response. Because sometimes I've learned that by me biting my tongue, and a lot of our mothers say, bite your lip, you know what I mean? I've learned that you have to navigate in a very similar way sometimes, but not biting your lip to lose yourself, but like biting your lip to give your best response. Because if you give your best response, a person can't judge you on that. Because sometimes we get judged on our first response. And I don't want, yeah, so that's what would be my advice on that one, really.
Yeah, when I heard this question, I had the same kind of furrowed brow that Jerome had as well, thinking, I think just to build on it, and I agree with him, I think it's if your aim is to try and affect the whole community on your own, then you may need to scale it back a little bit. I think if you're seize any opportunity. If any opportunity comes up where there's a chance for you to challenge someone's preconceived ideas or someone's preconceived stereotypes or anything like that, jump at it and use it. If you want to make a difference, you need to start challenging those that have perceptions counter to yours. I think that's one piece of advice. And the second thing is start small personally. If you're just you and yourself wanting to make a change, and start having conversations with people that are in your circles, especially those that you think need to hear or you want to speak to, have different views to you, and have a conversation, because the more people talk to each other, like I said previously, everything starts to cascade, and you may not ever see the impact of your words. But I think if everyone has a little, like I said before, if everyone has a little conversation, they do all feed into making a bigger change. So yeah, so my advice would be seize every opportunity if and when it arises. Don't just say, oh, I wish, if you end up saying, oh, I wish I'd said something after that, then that's a shame on you, essentially. So if an opportunity arises, seize it and start small. And I'd say talk to everyone around you and start having conversations openly and be honest and be receptive and open to feedback and be open to feel a little bit, I don't know the word I'm going to use, a little bit uneasy, and be all right with that and say, you know what, yeah, I want to actually have my preconceptions challenged. And the more people do that, the more difference it will make.
On that, I also think it's important definitely don't rush into things. And I think too many times people know that they want to start something and then realize like later that actually this is a lot more difficult than it seems, which is because racism is like woven into every aspect of the way we live, unfortunately. But I also think we do ourselves a disservice when we don't pay attention to things that already exist. So I think that as well as like looking, there are probably sometimes there is someone in the community already doing something, and it's okay to join forces or like help out in whatever thing that they have the gap in, rather than always wanting to like start something completely new, because then we spread ourselves thin, and not pay attention to like actually trying to build up on what we already have. Because like I want to say the house divided will not stand, but if we don't have the cohesive connections where people are actually understanding what's going on with each other, it ends up people attacking at all fronts without like paying attention to like the bigger picture and what's going on from the wider perspective.
And my next question, what advice would any of the panelists give to school governors? This is a question from the audience.
Yeah, I'm very much happy to answer this one because I actually sit on the board for a multi-academy trust. So I sit at the top of 9 primary and secondary schools. So I would say for me to get to that role is very much defined by my response, my civic duty to make sure that issues of education inequality and that the school is actually driving change which is both systemic change, but also cultural change for a space for teachers to advance learning and to advance the way that we should work in contemporary society. So my role in terms of supporting governors, because in terms of the Multi-Academy Trust, I've got a batch of about another, I think it's about 72 governors, which sit underneath that, which I also represent. It's very crucial that we're making them accountable and they understand their communities and they understand what's going on within their schools to change the culture and change the ecosystem within the school, because governors do have a very strong role to play alongside the Academy Trust. So it's quite crucial that we get more people in governing roles to help bring change, where many schools are still backwards and they don't have a true reflection and representation in the community which those schools serve. So I think for any person going to have a conversation with a governor or wanting to go into become a governor, just be open-hearted and say, I want to bring change as much, which is a key part of the journey of a governor, a real governor.
Great, thanks, Joel. And unfortunately, I think that's all we've got time for in terms of questions. Ty?
Hello, everyone. We are back. So that was our panel. You guys were amazing. So thank you for sharing and thank you for everyone for coming. So we are continuing the conversation on socials. If you have any questions that you would like to direct at any of our panelists, please at them, please at UK Youth, please hashtag Young and Black. This recording will be on YouTube at 9 AM. So if you've missed anything or if you want to go back and listen to anything, you can do that on our YouTube channel. If you are a young Black individual and want to share your stories, please record your video or tweet us your experience at hashtag Young and Black and at UK Youth. And next week is our last event for our series. So stay tuned and please come and watch that. And that is about being Black in the workplace. So we'll see you guys next week. And thank you again, everyone, for being involved and sharing your experiences. So thank you guys and have a nice evening. Bye.